Today, we're diving into one of the most personal and really universal journeys there is, the story of how we become who we are. From our very first moments to our last, we are always changing, always learning, always developing. So let's get into it. The epic story of you.
This is the big one, isn't it? What is that magic mix of forces, stages, and experiences that shapes your unique personality, your thoughts, your actions? Today, we're going to break down the science behind this incredible transformation, using a kind of roadmap laid out by some of the biggest thinkers in psychology. Okay, first things first. To really understand the journey, we need to be on the same page with a few key words. We throw around terms like growth, development, and maturity all the time, but in psychology, they actually have very specific meanings. Let's break them down.
So this slide really gets to the heart of it. On the left, you've got growth. Think of it as just getting bigger. It's a physical, measurable change. Height, weight. As the psychologist Frank put it, it's just cellular multiplication. But then on the right, you have development. And that's a much bigger deal. As B.F. Skinner said, it's a qualitative journey. It's about how our thoughts, emotions, and skills become more and more complex over time.
And that brings us to maturity. This is basically the finish line for physical growth, usually hitting us somewhere between 18 and 21. Our bones, our muscles, they've pretty much reached their peak size. But, and this is so important, our development, that mental and emotional journey, that keeps going for the rest of our lives. So what's powering this lifelong journey of ours? Well, for decades, scientists have been pointing to two massive forces that work together to make us who we are. A good way to think about it is you're given this genetic blueprint, right? And then there's the whole world that builds upon that blueprint. On one side, you've got heredity. That's the genetic hand you're dealt. And on the other, you have your environment, the world that shapes you. The Indian psychologist Durganand Sinha actually broke this down into three key areas: our home, our school, and our friends. It's this constant dance between our genes and our surroundings that really makes us, us. And at the absolute core of that genetic blueprint is this number, 23. At the moment of conception, you get 23 pairs of chromosomes, one set from each of your parents. These tiny little structures hold the entire instruction manual for building you.
And this is how those instructions actually become you. So think of your genotype as the entire cookbook of genetic possibilities that are written into your DNA. Your phenotype, on the other hand, is the final dish. It's the traits that actually get expressed, the things we can all see, like your eye color or your height. It's what happens when your genes meet the real world.
Okay, so let's see how all this theory actually plays out in those first super formative years of our lives. That genetic blueprint we just talked about, it doesn't just sit there. Childhood is where it starts to really interact with the world around us, and that lays the foundation for our thoughts and our personality. Two absolute giants of psychology, Jean Piaget and Sigmund Freud, gave us some incredible maps to understand this time. First up, let's talk about the Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget. He was fascinating because he wasn't just interested in what children know, he was obsessed with how they think. His whole idea was that we move through these distinct stages of cognitive development, and our ability to reason just gets more and more sophisticated with each step. So here they are, his 4 stages. It all kicks off with the sensory motor stage, where a baby learns about the world just by touching, tasting, and seeing. The classic example is object permanence. If you hide a toy from an infant, they genuinely believe it is banished. Poof, it's gone. Then, as they grow, their thinking evolves from simple symbols to being able to think logically about real things, and finally to being able to think abstractly in that formal operational stage.
Now, while Piaget was busy mapping out the mind, Sigmund Freud was over here mapping our inner emotional world. He argued that our personality is basically forged in a series of childhood stages, and that each one is driven by this fundamental psychic energy he called libido. You can think of it as a kind of life force or developmental drive.
Now look, Freud's theory is definitely controversial today, but you can't deny how revolutionary it was for its time. He laid out these 5 stages, from the oral stage, which is all about feeding, all the way to the genital stage that kicks in during adolescence. And his big idea was that our experiences during each of these phases could leave a lasting mark on our adult personality. All right, let's move on to the next chapter, the total whirlwind that is our teenage years. This is a time of huge change, where 2 really fundamental questions pop up. What's the right thing to do? And maybe the biggest one of all, who am I? To understand how we build our moral compass, we've got to turn to Lawrence Kohlberg. He was completely fascinated by how our ideas about right and wrong change over time. How we go from just, trying not to get in trouble to building a really complex, personal set of ethics.
So how did he figure this out? Well, he didn't just ask people if something was wrong. He wanted to know why they thought it was wrong. He used these tricky moral puzzles, like the famous Heinz dilemma. Should Heinz steal a drug to save his dying wife? Kohlberg didn't really care about the yes or no. He cared about the reasoning behind the answer, because that's what he believed showed you what stage of moral development a person was in.
So at the exact same time we're building this moral compass, we're also trying to figure out who we are. The psychologist Erik Erikson called this the central crisis of our teenage years, identity versus role confusion. And this whole quest for who am I is only really possible because of those new abstract thinking skills that Piaget was talking about. It's that crucial time where we're trying on different hats, trying to find the one that actually fits.
But the journey doesn't just stop when we turn 18. You might think the story kind of ends there, right? You figure yourself out and you're done. Well, not according to Erik Erikson. He argued that our development keeps going through our entire adult lives, throwing new challenges and new opportunities for growth at us every step of the way. This table here basically lays out Erikson's entire roadmap of the human lifespan. He came up with these 8 stages, and each one is defined by its own unique psychological challenge or crisis. It takes us all the way from learning to trust as a tiny infant, to finding real intimacy as a young adult, and finally to looking back on our lives with either a sense of integrity or despair in our later years. It's just a powerful reminder that we are always a work in progress. So, go ahead, take a second and look at this chart. Find your age range and think about the central challenge it describes. Does that ring true for you? Sometimes just seeing your own life struggles as part of this universal human journey can be a really profound shift in perspective.
So what's the big takeaway here? Development isn't some race with a finish line. It's this continuous, lifelong process of becoming. Every single stage builds on the one before it, and every experience you have shapes the person you're going to be tomorrow. The journey never really ends, which leaves us with the ultimate question: who are you becoming next?